What's something you can admit about a company you no longer work for? Nursing homes are always understaffed and overworked. The worst one I ever saw was 3 caregivers to 72 residents. That's 3 people who are responsible for feeding, toileting, and showering 72 people every day. Mistakes and abuse are incredibly common due to the sheer burnout that is rampant. Imagine being told, after a 16-hour shift, that you aren't allowed to leave because of abandonment laws for another 16 hours because someone didn't show up for their shift, and doing so while making barely above minimum wage. Ada, because this blew up, and I assumed it would get buried. I live in Washington State. There are some exceptions, but here's some info on the abandonment laws nursing homes threaten workers with. They count on workers to not know all the loopholes and exceptions. My first job out of high school was as a CNA at a nursing home, and it was awful. Not only being extremely overwhelmed by everyone hitting their call buttons, but literally not having the time to spend with the residents, so they didn't feel so alone. Because of that experience, I had zero issues driving 2 hours one way 3 to 4 times a week to help my mom shower and get ready for bed, when she was in a rehab facility, for a few months after being sick. My mom worked in a county nursing home from the ages of 18 to 63. I want to say this. There are people there that care very much. My mom still calls them her old people, and she would F up anyone's day who wasn't doing their job correctly. My friends would have a great uncle or aunt come through and request they be on her floor. She was a giant bitch to anyone who did not take their job seriously. It's tough as F. All the things you said about staffing are true, and she missed lots of Christmases and other holidays, sometimes volunteering for 16 hours, so she would get that time and a half pay. But overtime was mandatory most of the time, anyway. She made effing pennies, and would get quarter raises like the bag boy at the supermarket, and this person is entrusted with the daily care of your loved ones. She has been retired for 2 years now, but still works 1 day a week for more fun money, and of course as a contractor, they now pay her double, $44 an hour. I think part of the reason she does this is because it probably feels good to finally be paid what you're worth. She did get a good pension. That's about the best thing I can say about the compensation. But we struggled for years. If it seems as though your health insurance claim is being processed by a bunch of gorillas in heat, throwing darts, you aren't far off. My ex would get into arguments with them. Finance people are making medical decisions. My anesthesia was denied for my ankle reconstruction. The codes used sure implied that they thought I could have had a local. A lot of minor knee surgeries are done with like an epidural. But this was a 2-hour procedure, during which they drilled holes through my femur and tibia. Epidural is not enough for that. I did call the insurance company and get it covered, but I shouldn't have had to, and how many people would just not question it? Also, for the same surgery, I got a bill from the hospital for a no insurance discount off the full $26,000, or whatever it was. I called them and said, I have insurance, and they said, oh, it looks like we forgot to pre-authorize. No apology or offer to run the insurance. I literally said to them, I don't know, that sounds like your problem, and they did get it fixed, but effing hell. Anytime you think your company is just a hot mess behind closed doors, and everyone else has their shit together everywhere, is as hot a mess as yours. I once had to ask our COO to call me, so I could explain why submitting 2 completely different forecasts to 2 different investors within 24 hours with no material changes in our circumstance would, in fact, be fraud. Startups. We did not commit fraud that day, but who knows what happens on other days. I got my manager fired for falsifying data to the FDA, so, in my case, maybe other places are actually a bit better off. My family owned veterinary hospitals. Now, I know the price has gotten nuts, but that is not what this post is about. Most vets truly care, and I have seen some do anything, literally anything, to help your animal. I remember wanting to leave after closing, so tired, and my dad, the vet, telling me he wasn't leaving yet, he wanted to sit with this one dog all night. I think vets and animal care workers are very special people. They went into the work because they love animals, and on a day-to-day basis, they mostly see animals who are sick and or in pain, when they are obviously not behaving sweetly. And the animal workers love them and care for them, and treat them with so much patience and respect. Love those people. I'd like to add on to this. I work in an emergency and specialty veterinary clinic, and I've worked 18 hours straight before, with no lunch. I regularly stay 1 to 3 hours late. I cry over poor patient outcomes. I have paid for pain meds for a patient whose owner couldn't afford them. I've bought supplies to make patients more comfortable in the hospital. I'm not a veterinarian, but I am still hands-on with patients every single day. Most of the doctors I work with beat themselves up over the cases which turn out poorly. Many only want to do the right thing. We are tired, but I'd say 85% of the people I've met in the field do it because they just really care. We supported 1,000 plus businesses' office phone systems, and they all use the same password for their admin access to their systems. I bet money your company name is somewhere in that password. Bingo. I used to work in the marketing team for a large recruitment company. About 99% of the jobs posted on their websites, the company owned about 35 web domains, and shared on other websites, are fake. The marketing and SEO department was tasked in creating super optimized job listings that outperformed real job listings. To apply to these job listings, you would have to register an account. This would inflate our candidate database, and we would have loads of CVs. The sales team would then take this information and contact companies to get them to pay to put their open vacancies on our websites, because we had one of the largest candidate databases. I remember getting so annoyed by this practice, I started reporting these vacancies as fake, even on LinkedIn. But LinkedIn rejected my report, saying it was legitimate. It wasn't, and I know this because I created that fake vacancy. What makes this even more alarming is that so many recruitment companies do this. If you want to apply for a job, you're better off going to that company's website instead, and not using a third party. I left that place, and swore I would never work in recruitment again. Here's an open secret: IT workers are really good at Googling your problem. That's not restricted to IT. Even doctors leave the room to go look up your symptoms and deduce what the issue is. They used to do it with books, now they use the internet. Edit: I am not complaining about doctors using the tools they have available, I am pointing out that it happens. I work in IT, I also use Google to diagnose issues. I worked for a very popular fast food chain, and was shocked to find out their hygiene standards were actually high, and everybody followed them. Like, everyone really did their job, and the place was really clean and safe. McDonald's, I assume. McDonald's it was, indeed. I worked at Panera, it's the same. Clean as a hospital. Which is probably why they serve overpriced hospital food. Long past NDA. I used to support restaurant POS systems. Every system managed and supported by us had the same admin username and password for the computers, the admin software, back of house, and the credit card processing software. Also, their employee database file on the terminals was an Excel spreadsheet. It had their names, login hashes, addresses, date of birth, phone numbers, social security numbers, etc., and you could mention the aforementioned admin username or password to access them. They also outsourced support to a country that hates the US. As I trained them, they reminded me, quite often, how they don't like the US. Stanford University has a database full of everyone that's ever attended the school, or ever been treated at their hospitals. With the right access, you can look up anyone in their system, and see their employment history, every place they've lived since graduating, and their connections within the larger Stanford community. The best part? There's a section that gives all the tax and income information, with an estimate based on equations that say how much the person could realistically donate to the school, without negative effect. That way, when they call to fundraise, they know exactly how much to ask for. Meanwhile, my school likely has the exact same data aggregation system. And when they call or email me, often begging for medium donations, I remember the time, every time that they gave me zero financial aid, and tell them that I had a 3.9 college GPA, no family graduates of a BA, much less an MA, ever, family income of $25K per year, including me, and worked a full-time job through school, and played their D1 sports, when I needed that relief most. And when a billionaire left a $10 million investment, he stipulated it could not be used on scholarships, and they agreed. Yeah, I may make a lot now, but also you didn't give a rat's ass when I was struggling. As a former compliance director for telehealth mental health agencies, I would urge people to run from agencies like BetterHelp, Talkspace, Charlie Health, Guideline Healthcare, Ellie Health, etc. These are started by TechCore and other dollar-driven corporations, and have little interest in protecting you, whether it's your mental health, confidentiality, or ethically driven care. These places are unacceptable, and have low-quality treatment providers. You are best to find a local MH agency, or individuals on Psychology Today. As a therapist, I endorse this message. It's like, wish for mental health care with novice therapists. And it's generally more expensive than seeing an experienced mental health provider at a solo or group practice. This was about 20 years ago, but when I worked in a call center at Sprint, our calls would get recorded, and we would receive an email that included a link to where we could review a transcript of our call. This transcript included the 3 pieces of personally identifiable information needed to access someone's account. Well, the email they sent to us used a _get parameter ID that was simply a number to reference our transcript. If you changed the number, you would get someone else's transcript and the 3 pieces of personally identifiable information. I figured, that's a pretty big security hole, but I at least have to access it from my personal office computer, so they'd see who did it. Unless you went to the break room, where you could access it there. Seeing how I was just out of college, and I wanted to get a software engineering job, I brought this up to management, who proceeded to do nothing. I left a couple months later, for a SW engineering job. I discovered a massive security flaw in Sprint's call center. It is very difficult for Intercontinental Hotels Group to remove hotels from the portfolio if they are paying their dues and are mid-life cycle. They can be a very bad hotels, and there is nothing that can be done, except for some rare life-threatening situations. Some hotels have consistently failed every quality evaluation for years, but will remain in the system, because at the end of the day, they make money for the company, no matter how hard they harm the brand name. Marriott can do it a bit more easily for non-compliant hotels, due to the structure of the quality department being through a third party. Dozens of things are stolen from every single Walmart, every single day. And the F's given by management about it are very few and far between. Edit, they like to pretend otherwise, but in reality, management actively joke about how much shit was stolen day to day. What they say to everyone else, and what they say behind the scenes, doesn't remotely match up. That's because, in most retail stores, corporate specifically tells you not to give a shit. Record the video, hand it to the authorities, and move on. The last thing the company wants is a lawsuit, because some LP dude wanted to cosplay cop and got stabbed over a bag of apples. At the company I worked for, everyone was assigned a Microsoft account. This was used for Outlook emailing and Teams for instant messaging and video calls. Naturally, plenty of privileged and sensitive information was exchanged in these ways. Everyone had the same password. It was first name last name. Every employee and manager. I didn't have the guts to test the theory on an executive's account. And this was a company that, among other droll and boring trainings, made sure we had our requisite cybersecurity and anti-phishing training. There was lots more silliness at that company, but that right there tells you all you need to know. I worked for a bunny farm, where we're raising bunnies for laboratories. They investigated my identity for weeks to see if I was some sort of Greenpeace agent. I found it weird at first, but then I understood why. They kept 7 to 8 bunnies in a square meter cage and didn't give an F about them. They were using metal scrubs to scrub the cages and break baby bunnies' legs while doing it. Some smaller bunnies were falling out of the cage in a section that all their poop and trash was crushed by a machine and would make a little squeak before getting crushed. I quit after 4 days. Worst experience in my life. I don't know the specifics, the laws and such, but the manager of the Amazon warehouse I was at wasn't allowed to tell workers they couldn't use the fans or AC in these 100 degrees plus environments, but somehow, he was allowed to shut off the fans and AC whenever he wanted. So, this guy would spend the entire day, most days, following around anyone who would turn them on, and personally turn them back off immediately. He was later fired, on paper, for telling people they couldn't use the fans and AC, but really it was because the new district head just didn't like him. Amazon had absolutely no problems with the guy shutting fans off. People had been sending in complaints about it for years, but never had a word back about it. I worked for a candy company that makes chocolate-coated pretzels and turtles for over 5 years. By the time I left, I wouldn't eat the candy, even when they were giving it away. I saw them let tainted product leave the factory and covering it up, because reworking it would be too expensive, to faking food safety compliance and safety checks. Years after I left, the entire team running operations got replaced at once, so maybe it's better now, but holy shit, it made me paranoid about packaged food in general, and a little horrified at how much blind faith we put in the people that make our food. Edit, don't want them to sue me, so I won't say the name, but it's basically the top result when you Google chocolate turtles. For years, we manufactured and processed thousands of components incorrectly that substantially increased the probability of sudden and catastrophic failure. The component? Well, it's the main attachment points for various missiles and bombs for the US military. Discovered this shortly after working there. Notified the operations manager, who ignored it. Notified the president, who kind of acknowledged it, but refused to address it, or notify the customer. Finally notified the ownership, who promptly had me replaced, LOL. I've worked for Bank of America and Wells Fargo, and both banks screw over customers constantly, but there is a difference in how and why they do it. Bank of America will screw you over because they are huge and disorganized, and no one has a clue what's going on, so customers get screwed over when people don't know how to do their job, and no one knows how to fix it when things go wrong. Wells Fargo will screw you over, and they know exactly what they are doing and how they are going to do it. They will intentionally design a process to take too long, forcing the customer to pay additional fees. Your child's daycare worker is extremely overworked and underpaid. Parents would complain all the time about how much daycare cost, but it's less expensive than a babysitter. I always wanted to ask the complaining parent how much they would charge to watch 13 children they were not related to. I worked in the US, we literally had to have a plan on what we would do if an armed gunman broke in. A lot of small businesses are really dirty in their kitchens, like they have the outward presentation of being a fancy French bakery, but the floors are dirty, and there's bugs everywhere, and they're reusing dirty sheet pans from raw product for baked product, and spreading frangipane all over things that shouldn't be covered in raw nut butter. But if you try and call that out, you're a bitch, and fired, LOL. Positive 1, it's a pretty small place, but Seattle Sutton's Healthy Eating actually was super serious about food safety and cleanliness, and never refroze product. Ingredients arrived refrigerated, and surplus would be frozen until the next meal it was needed for. If it got thawed out and still not used for the next cycle, it was thrown away or donated to local farmers. They had zero issue with pulling food off the line and even trashing entire batches if something was off. She tried franchising once, and none of the new locations could maintain her personal quality and safety standard, so she shut it down after about 18 months, even though she was making good money off it. Seattle herself was also super nice, and all her grandkids worked summers there, through high school and college, and came in and worked their asses off, instead of being the arrogant asshats so many NEPO hires are. Bed Bath & Beyond. Utter abuse of employees, and sexual harassment, from the top down. Always got swept under the rug. If the girl or guy got an attorney, they'd move the manager, or supervisor, to a different location temporarily. I say temporarily, because they eventually fire, or get the employee to quit soon after. They cut hours, and say there was no budget for it, even though that was the only employee affected. I'm happy they're out of business. Edit, I remember there was a time when only managers, not supervisors, were allowed to open the door after hours to let us out. We were forced to stay on the clock and clean up and whatnot. That all changed when a girl had a severe panic attack, apparently, which induced a cardiac episode. We kept screaming for the manager, to no avail. 911 was called, and we're told we were locked in with a medical emergency. They showed up before the door was open, and you could clearly see the employee in distress. They finally opened the door when the police were after the paramedics. The manager got read the riot act by the cops, and a detailed report was made. Paramedics said they believed she was having a heart attack, and was taken away with lights and sirens. Bed Bath & Beyond got in so much trouble. I am happy to say, the employee was fine after being treated. She sued the dog piss, and won her case, So I heard. Also, the other employees, who had suits for false imprisonment, won their cases, too. Absolutely horrible company to work for. Almost every president, CEO or CFO I worked for, was an egomaniac, who was cheating on his wife, usually with an employee that works for them, and were compulsive liars. In one specific company, the CEO was sued several times by former employees for sexual harassment, but kept doing it anyways, and the CFO lied about the company financial status, to lay off about 70 employees, when in actuality, all they wanted to do was more than double his and the CEO's salaries. Back about 30 years ago, I worked in the IT department for a famous brand name aerospace firm. Name withheld, to protect the innocent engineers, specializing in the construction and testing of satellites. My main responsibilities were maintaining some very old computer systems, lot of stories about that, and some ground equipment, but sometimes, I would have to put on a bunny suit and fix something at engineering workstations in the high bays. One day, a strange wooden box, about size of a large shoebox, was shipped to my desk by the internal mail people. I sometimes got shipments of things, like memory modules or hard disks. But this box has paper stickers on it, clearly labeled, flight hardware, something that should never have been shipped to me. Out of curiosity, I opened it, and found in the box, a device, called a flight sequencer. Basically one of the key devices, that controls a spacecraft in flight. What was stranger, the spacecraft that this sequencer belonged to, was a high-profile deep space probe for a Mars mission. One of the first missions to Mars, in a long time. More confusing was, that Mars craft, has been launched about 3 months earlier. So, I found myself, holding the flight hardware sequencer, for a space probe, that was already several million miles away, and there would be no chance to install it now. Of course, there is a nearly 100% chance, a spare had be used for the launch, but there was a certain oh shit moment, when I realized what it was. Of course, a few months later, that space probe was lost, when it tried to enter Mars orbit. I'm sure, that is completely unrelated chance. Right?